In the summer of 1886, a modest survey team departed from Knoxville with orders to chart timberland deep within the Appalachian Mountains for a private timber concern. What began as routine employment transformed into something far more sinister. The wilderness fell silent around them. Inexplicable footprints materialized near their encampments. Stones appeared in deliberate arrangements that defied natural explanation. When darkness fell, something massive circled their fires with measured, purposeful steps. The men soon understood a terrible truth. Those ridges were not uninhabited. They had trespassed in a territory that belonged to something else entirely, something that had no intention of surrendering its domain without contest. So, before we continue, please make sure to subscribe and let us know where you're watching from. Thanks. I remember that year with the clarity of fresh ink upon parchment. It was 1886, and the mountains possessed an antiquity that mocked every name we mortals had bestowed upon them. I was 23 then, freshly employed as a surveyor's assistant for a timber company based in Knoxville. They dispatched us eastward into a stretch of the Appalachian wilderness that appeared on no proper cartographer's map. The gentlemen in their comfortable offices called it unclaimed opportunity. The people who actually dwelt near those mountains called it something altogether different, and they spoke of it in whispers. There were 6 souls in our party when we departed from the last proper town. Mr. Edmund Hale served as our chief surveyor and expedition leader. A meticulous man with a thin beard streaked with silver and a gold pocket watch he consulted more frequently than his compass. Elijah was our guide, a wiry mountain man with gray threading through his beard and lines carved deep around his eyes from years of squinting through its smoke and mountain mist. He moved through the forest as though he'd been born to it, with an ease that spoke of decades spent reading the land's secrets. 2 laborers, Brody and Samuel, walked behind the pack mules and shouldered most of our supplies. Brody possessed a crooked nose and a nervous laugh that emerged at the most inappropriate moments, while Samuel was broad-shouldered and taciturn, a man who hoarded his words like precious coins. Jonah, our cook, handled the provisions and cursed at everything with remarkable creativity. Even the weather bore the brunt of his colorful vocabulary. As for myself, I maintained the expedition notebooks, assisted with the surveying instruments, and endeavored not to reveal just how inexperienced I truly felt. We departed before dawn on a morning that smelled of cold smoke and damp earth. The final street lanterns cast a feeble glow that did little to push back the encroaching darkness. Townsfolk watched us from behind curtained windows, but not one soul ventured forth to bid us farewell. Only an elderly woman met us at the edge of the main thoroughfare. She wore a dark shawl despite the season's warmth and leant heavily upon a walking stick that appeared more substantial than her wizened frame. "You keep out of the high hollers," she told Elijah, her gaze fixed solely upon him, as though the rest of us were inconsequential. "You know the places I mean. You know what walks up there." Elijah's jaw tightened, the muscle jumping beneath his weathered skin. "We're following the ridgeline, Martha. The company's paying good money. We'll be back before the snow settles. Them that going past the 3rd ridge don't always come back," she said, her voice dropping to a rasp. "Not whole, anyhow. The tall ones don't care about your money, Elijah. They don't care about your maps or your grand plans. They only care about their own." I shifted my weight uncomfortably and looked away. I had heard talk in the tavern the previous evening, stories about giants in the timber, ridge walkers that observed from the treeline and made off with livestock. Some claimed it was a wild man, others a vengeful spirit. Some swore it was merely bears and superstitious nonsense. I had grown up with such tales and believed I understood them for what they truly were, old stories designed to keep children from wandering too far from home. Mr. Hale pressed 2 fingers to the brim of his hat in a gesture of polite dismissal. "We appreciate the concern, madam. We're properly equipped for bears." She did not answer him. She maintained her penetrating stare upon Elijah until he nodded once. A short, tight acknowledgement, as if agreeing to some unspoken covenant. Only then did she step aside and permit us to pass. The road deteriorated to a rutted track before noon, and then to a narrow path that barely accommodated the mules. The trees pressed closer with each mile, their tall trunks rising in tight ranks, their branches interlocking overhead to block out most of the sky. Fallen leaves lay deep and damp underfoot. Our boots sank and slid on the slope, and the pack animals snorted and tossed their heads with increasing agitation. "Feels close in here," Jonah muttered behind me, shifting his sack upon his shoulder. "Like the trees are listening." "Trees don't listen," Samuel said. It was the longest sentence I had heard from him since we'd left town. "They just stand. They stand and hide things," Brody added, his nervous laugh breaking the stillness. "Got an uncle who got lost up in these parts. Never found so much as a boot. Bears don't clean a man that clean. Reckon he just walked off the earth entire." "That's quite enough," Mr. Hale said from the front of our column. "We have work to do. Elijah, how far to the first ridgeline?" 3 hours at a steady pace," Elijah answered without turning. His voice carried back along the path with practiced ease. "Longer if the mules keep stumbling." I observed our guide as we walked. He moved with an assurance none of us could match, selecting his steps without looking down, as though his feet possessed their own wisdom. Every now and then his head would turn, not much, just enough for his eyes to sweep the trees on one side, then the other. The gesture was subtle, but it occurred with disturbing frequency. It lodged in my mind like a splinter. By midday, the air grew cooler, though the climb had sweat streaming beneath my shirt and waistcoat. We stopped in a narrow hollow to rest the animals. The hollow was quiet in a manner that unsettled my very bones. No bird calls, no insect buzz, only the sound of our own movements and the slow clink of tack and harness. "Do you hear that?" I asked, though there was nothing to hear. Jonah gave me a weary look. "I don't hear a damn thing." "That's precisely what I mean," I said. Elijah squatted near a patch of mud where a trickle of water seeped from beneath a moss-covered rock. He brushed aside dead leaves and frowned deeply. "Tracks here," he announced. We gathered round him with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. In the mud lay a print that had spread with moisture, but still retained a clear outline. It was broad and extraordinarily long, longer than my boot by several inches. 5 blunt impressions marked the front where toes would be. It appeared too wide for a man's footprint and too elongated for any bear I had ever encountered. "Bear," Mr. Hale said immediately. "Nothing more. Bears don't step flat like that," Elijah answered in a low tone. He pushed his finger into the mud along what should have been the heel. "Weight's all wrong, and there's no claw marks. Could be the mud blurred them," I suggested, more to steady my own churning thoughts than from any genuine conviction. Elijah looked at me for a long moment. His eyes were a washed-out blue, like a winter sky. "Could be," he said, though his voice held no agreement whatsoever. Brody backed away from the track, his face pale beneath the dirt. "Whatever made that has a monstrous foot on it," he muttered. "Bigger than any man I've ever seen." Samuel snorted once, but he offered no alternative explanation. Mr. Hale straightened his waistcoat. "We note it and move on. Our task is to mark suitable timber and map the ridges. Bears or no bears, the company still wants their survey lines completed." I wrote a brief notation in my book because that was my role, my purpose on this expedition. One broad track in wet hollow, approximately 11 inches in length, no visible claws. The words appeared thin and inadequate upon the page. They did not capture the feeling in the pit of my stomach. We climbed again after that, the trees growing denser with altitude. The light took on a dull, uniform quality, as if the day had become stuck at a single hour and refused to advance. The ridge line emerged beneath our feet in a slow, steady rise. By late afternoon, we reached a narrow clearing where the trees thinned sufficiently to provide a vista. From that vantage point, we could observe waves of forested hills rolling away in every direction. No roads, no smoke from cabin chimneys, no signs of human habitation, just ridges and hollows and darker patches where the trees grew even thicker. "There," Mr. Hale said, pointing with his folded map toward the east. "Second ridge, third ridge, then the plateau on the far side. That's the section they're most interested in. Plenty of hardwood if these survey lines are accurate." Folks don't settle there for good reason, Elijah said quietly. Because no proper road has been cut yet, Mr. Hale replied. That's precisely why we're here. We established camp just below the crest of the ridge in a small level area amongst the roots of a great oak tree. The men erected 2 canvas tents, one for Mr. Hale and myself, the other for the remaining crew. Jonah constructed a small fire within a ring of stones and boiled coffee that tasted of smoke and grit. We consumed salt pork and hard bread and beans that had not fully softened despite prolonged cooking. As the light faded, the forest grew even more silent. The fire cast a feeble glow that seemed to stop abruptly against the tree trunks, as though the darkness beyond possessed substance. Every now and then, a branch would creak somewhere high above us, or something would drop into the undergrowth with a soft thump. Each sound drew our eyes involuntarily. Not much singing from the birds here, Jonah observed, staring into his tin cup. They know to keep quiet, Elijah replied. He sat near the edge of the firelight, his back against a tree trunk, his rifle resting across his knees. From what? I asked. He glanced at me. From what lives here. Some places belong to men. Some don't. These ridges never did. Brody pulled his blanket tighter round his shoulders and forced an unconvincing laugh. You mean Martha's tall man? The ridge walker? Thought you didn't put stock in stories, Elijah. I put stock in tracks, Elijah said, and in what I've seen with my own eyes. The fire crackled. A spark leapt and died. I waited for him to elaborate, but he fell into silence. The others looked at him in the manner men do when they desperately want to hear more, but simultaneously fear what the answer might be. We retired early. The day's climate exhausted me thoroughly, and the thin bedroll upon the cold ground felt almost welcoming. Mr. Hale extinguished the lantern in our tent, and darkness settled over us like a burial shroud. The canvas walls provided no barrier against the sounds outside. At first, there was only the wind slipping through branches. Then, sometime later, I cannot say precisely when, I woke to a different noise. It was faint, measured, and distinctly heavy. A soft, steady percussion that seemed to circle the perimeter of our camp. Footsteps. I held my breath and listened intently. The steps did not hurry. They circled with deliberate patience. Every few moments, there would be a pause, as if whatever made them had stopped to listen in return. I turned my head carefully. I could just discern Mr. Hale's shape upon the other bedroll. His breathing remained slow and even. If he heard the sound, he gave no indication. The hair upon my arms rose of its own accord. I told myself it was a deer or perhaps a wandering cow that had somehow strayed this far into the mountains. But the weight in those steps contradicted that comforting thought. The very ground seemed to register each footfall. The footsteps ceased directly behind our tent. The canvas did not move. Nothing brushed against it. There was only a stillness that pressed upon my ears like physical pressure. Then, from the far side of the camp, I heard Elijah's voice. It was low but remarkably firm. Keep walking, he called into the darkness. You're not welcome in this fire's light. The silence that followed felt thick enough to touch. Then the footsteps recommenced, moving away through the trees, slow, steady, unhurried, until they faded entirely into the night. I lay awake for an extended period after that, staring into the darkness and listening to my own racing heart. I did not achieve sleep again until the first gray light showed through the seam of the tent. I woke with my jaw clenched and a painful crick in my neck. The coals in the ring were dull and ringed with white ash. No one spoke for quite some time. We ate quickly and packed our gear in a quiet manner that had nothing whatsoever to do with ordinary fatigue. Elijah walked a wide circle beyond the camp perimeter before we departed. He kept his eyes upon the ground and the low vegetation. When he returned, he did not address Mr. Hale first. He looked directly at me. Tracks on the far side, he said. Fresh ones. 2 sets. One larger, one smaller. Mr. Hale folded his map with deliberate care. Bear and cub, he stated. Elijah shook his head slowly. No claws in the prints. The stride is excessively long. Heel to toe placement, it's bipedal. Brody rubbed at his nose and stared fixedly at the trees. Samuel checked the lashings on the packs with unnecessary thoroughness and gave one of the mules a firm pat. Jonah held the coffee pot, but did not drink. The smell of it turned my stomach. We climbed toward the next ridge. The path narrowed to a ledge no wider than a table in certain sections. Loose stones rolled beneath our boots. The mules balked and snorted with increasing frequency. Elijah proceeded first, maintaining steady steps so the animals would follow his lead. I watched his shoulders. He did not slow or hesitate. Around midday, we reached a saddle between two rises. A line of spruce trees marked the low point. In their shadow, we discovered something deeply unsettling. 5 stones stood stacked beside the path, each placed flat, decreasing in size from bottom to top. They had not balanced themselves by accident. Someone, or something, had transported them there and arranged them with clear intention. A tuft of coarse hair was wedged beneath the topmost stone. It was dark and long and kinked in a manner that made my skin crawl with instinctive revulsion. "Hunters mark trails," Mr. Hale said. He spoke in a voice calculated to settle our nerves. "Or children passed the time constructing such things." Elijah extracted the hair and rolled it between his fingers, examining it closely. "This did not come from any coat," he said. He pocketed it without further comment. We proceeded onward. The forest transformed along the slope. We passed trees with bark stripped away in long vertical bands, higher than any man could reach. We discovered a log that had been half lifted and positioned at an angle against another trunk, forming a narrow opening that reeked of musk and wet earth. The air carried a sour odor that none of us gave voice to. The day grew warm. My shirt adhered to my back. The sound of our footsteps merged with the rattle of pack harnesses. I kept my eyes alternating low, then high, then low again, never finding any comfort. When we stopped to drink at a shallow creek, I extracted my notebook and wrote brief notes because that was my habit when I did not know what else to do. I sketched the stacked stones, the stripped bark, the lifted log. My hand trembled sufficiently to render the lines somewhat crooked. "Don't put stories on paper," Jonas said, observing me. "Makes them persist. I'm merely recording what I see." I protested. "What you see is trouble," he answered flatly. Brody had wandered several paces upstream. He crouched by the bank and called out in a tight, strained voice, "Here, this isn't right." We joined him with varying degrees of reluctance. In the grit at the water's edge lay additional prints. They descended from the trees, crossed the trickle of water, and ascended the far side. The stride was remarkably long. The heel impression showed profound depth. In one of the steps, a single-toe mark bore a nick, as if the nail had split and pressed a notch into the mud. Mr. Hale stared at the creek and pressed his lips together until they whitened. "We are losing valuable time," he said. "We reach the 3rd ridge by dusk if we wish to remain on schedule." "Schedule," Jonah repeated under his breath. He stood and swung his pack up again with evident resignation. As we climbed away from the stream, the woods grew quiet again in that same oppressive manner. The only sound was the wet drag of our boots and the labored breathing of the mules. Periodically, a branch would snap somewhere at our backs. When we stopped, the next sound would come after a pause, as if something had also stopped and then decided to continue. Elijah raised a hand suddenly and held it aloft. We froze instantly. He pointed toward a slope covered in ferns. I followed his indication. At first, I perceived nothing but green fronds and dark trunks. Then one of the shadows shifted, not from wind. A shape moved uphill, steady and controlled, maintaining trees between itself and our party. I could not discern more than a suggestion of arms and a thick torso. It did not run. It paced us. "Bear," Mr. Hale said again, but softer this time, less convinced. Samuel adjusted his grip on the lead rope. "That's no bear," he said. It was the first time I had detected genuine fear in his voice. We recommenced our march. The shape maintained its pace. We quickened our steps. It stayed with us, just beyond full visibility. When the path turned sharply to the right around a rock face, a stone the size of my fist struck the trail ahead and bounced into the brush. It had come from our left, from the brush where the shape had been concealed. Brody flinched and stumbled. "They're throwing projectiles," he said, his voice cracking. "Christ in heaven." "No sudden movements," Elijah said. "Keep walking. Maintain your pace." We rounded the bend. The shape did not follow across the exposed rock face. For a brief period, we observed only open slope and trees. The air felt thinner there, as if the world had created more space for breathing. Then the path descended back under tree cover, and the sensation of being observed returned with redoubled intensity. In late afternoon, we reached the second ridge. The trees were more ancient here. Their roots crossed the earth like thick ropes. We discovered another cleared patch, no larger than our previous camp, with a rotted fire circle that appeared quite old. A few charred sticks lay within it. No one had camped here in recent seasons, perhaps not in years. "We hold here," Mr. Hale announced. "We need daylight to select a safe descent into the next hollow." Elijah nodded his agreement. He did not argue or suggest alternatives. That worried me more than anything else had that entire day. We erected the tents again. Jonah kindled the fire. The smoke drifted straight upward in the still air. The mules stood with their heads lowered and their ears rotating nervously. Samuel checked the animals twice without being asked. Brody sat with his back against a stump and kept his rifle across his knees. He made no attempt to conceal the tremor in his hands. As we consumed our meager meal, a call carried through the trees. It was not the long rising note of a coyote. It was shorter and considerably deeper, ending in a flat, heavy sound. It came once, and then from far to our right, another answered with a pattern that matched, but at a different pitch. They did not sound like any animal I knew. "That's people," Jonah whispered, his face pale in the firelight. Elijah shook his head definitively. "Not our kind." Mr. Hale stood abruptly. "No chances. Firebright. Everyone stays close." Night descended quickly beneath the high branches. The circle of light felt desperately small. The call sounded again, distinctly closer this time. Then a clicking noise emerged from the darkness, like a tongue against teeth. Another responded from the opposite side. I thought of the elderly woman at the town line and the manner in which she had stared at Elijah without blinking. I wondered what she would say now. A rock struck the outer edge of the fire circle and rolled toward the ashes. Embers leapt and died. Another projectile struck the side of a tent and slid down the canvas with a rasping sound. We raised our rifles as one. Elijah did not raise his. He stood and called out in a remarkably steady voice. "We don't mean harm," he said clearly. "We're passing through. We depart at first light." Silence. I felt every hair upon my arms rise. I forced my hands to lower the barrel of my rifle, following Elijah's example. Mr. Hale did not lower his. He maintained it in firing position, his eyes fixed upon the darkness. Something moved at the very edge of the firelight. Then a tall shape stepped between two trunks and stood there. I could perceive the outline of shoulders and a head positioned above them. The arms hung down past where a man's arms would terminate. The chest rose and fell with slow, measured breaths. The face remained shrouded in shadow. It did not flinch at the fire's light. It did not approach any closer. Brody made a small, involuntary sound in his throat. Jonah's teeth clicked together audibly. Samuel whispered a prayer I did not recognize. My own thoughts went entirely blank, then narrowed to simple facts. We were 6 men. It was one creature. That realization provided no comfort whatsoever. Elijah raised one hand slowly, palm outward. The shape tilted its head as if considering him. Then it turned without haste and departed. The footsteps were heavy but measured. When it had gone, the woods closed around the camp again with that same pressure upon the ears. We did not speak for an extended period. When we finally did, it was in short, fragmented bursts. It assessed our number, Mr. Hale said. He attempted to sound calm and succeeded for perhaps a few words. It chose not to engage. This is merely territorial posturing. They harvest acorns along these ridges, Elijah said. We've camped directly in their path. We move at dawn. We leave absolutely no scraps. What are they? Brody asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elijah stared into the darkness as if awaiting the next sound. Some say they're people who abandoned civilization. Some say they were here first, before any of us. I don't know the truth. I only know they protect places where they feed and raise their young. Mr. Hale placed his rifle upon his bedroll. "We're not here to test them," he said. "We're here to complete a survey. We establish the line tomorrow and finish the ridge count by noon. Then we return home." Elijah turned his head sharply. "You wish to continue forward? Our route back is the identical path that brought us here," Mr. Hale said. "They already know that route intimately. I prefer fresh ground and increased speed. We descend into the next hollow and cross to the third ridge. It's a direct line to the plateau. 2 days out on the far side places us near a river that flows towards settlement." Elijah regarded him for an extended moment, then nodded once. "Then we must keep our fire minimal. No scraps whatsoever, no latrine near any water source, and absolutely no direct eye contact if they approach closely. That registers as threat. Everything registers as threat," Jonah muttered bitterly. "We breathe, and it registers as threat. I lay down later with my boots positioned close by and the rifle resting across them. I did not close my eyes immediately. The night sounds emerged and faded in patterns that made no sense to me. Short knocking sounds like with striking wood, a whistle that ascended and broke off abruptly. Then nothing for an extended stretch, as if the woods itself held its breath. Sometime after midnight, I woke to a smell like wet fur and earth positioned near the tent wall. Fabric brushed against something outside. Not a hand, perhaps a forearm. It slid along the canvas and paused directly beside my head. I did not speak. I did not move a single muscle. The weight of it pressed a shallow indentation into the fabric. It remained there for several heartbeats. Then it lifted, and I heard the heavy footsteps again as they faded into the trees. When morning arrived, Mr. Hale observed that nothing in the camp had been broken or stolen. He employed that fact like a tool to reshape our fear into something more manageable. We packed our gear methodically. We cleaned the fire circle until it appeared entirely unused. Elijah smoothed the ground where the prints had approached. He extracted the tuft of hair from his pocket, examined it once more, and tucked it deeper into his coat. We commenced our descent from the ridge toward the next hollow. The slope proved steeper than our previous descent. The earth was wet and treacherously slick with decomposing leaves. The mules slid and planted their hooves with considerable effort. We maintained spacing between ourselves. No one joked. No one told stories to fill the oppressive silence. By mid-morning, we reached a narrow draw where a small stream cut through moss-covered rock. Bones lay scattered upon the flat area beside the water. Deer, from the appearance of them. The joints had been pulled apart cleanly, almost surgically. The skull sat upright, as if deliberately positioned after the butchery was complete. I counted 3 sets, possibly taken at different times. The sight possessed a tidy order that made my mouth go dry. Samuel bent down and carefully repositioned the skull upon its side. "They don't waste anything," he said in a low voice. Elijah nodded. "They preserve the marrow for winter," he said. "We need to move. Now." We crossed the draw and began ascending the next rise. The calls commenced again, closer than ever before. One to our left, then another ahead. The pattern differed now, shorter, more urgent. We pressed onward, and with each switchback, a call answered another call. The hair upon the back of my neck rose involuntarily. I closed my notebook and did not open it again that hour. Near the summit, a low structure materialized between the trees. It was constructed from limbs woven together and wedged against a fallen trunk. Fresh sap showed upon some of the cut ends. A strip of cloth hung from a branch. It was canvas, a corner of a pack cover, torn away. The edge was frayed and darkened with accumulated dirt. The canvas matched the weave from our company supply stock exactly. Elijah touched the cloth and looked at each of us in turn. "Others came through here," he said. "Not long ago. Where are they now?" Brody asked, though I suspect he already knew the answer. No one responded to his question. A stone rolled somewhere above us, then another. We all looked upward simultaneously. The slope above the structure was bare of undergrowth for a brief stretch. Something moved along that elevated edge. Not one shape this time. Two. One larger, one considerably smaller, moving in a line that matched the prints Elijah had observed near our first camp. "We keep moving," Mr. Hale said. He spoke with a certainty he manifestly did not feel. "Maintain your pace." We pushed higher. The path bent toward a narrow notch between two substantial boulders. As we approached it, a log crashed down upon the trail behind us with a concussive thud that loosened dirt and small stones. It had not been an accident. It had been deliberately rolled from above to block the route we had taken. The mules panicked and reared. Samuel and Jonah struggled to control them. Brody slipped and went on one knee. I grasped his arm and hauled him upright. "They're driving us," Elijah said. He stated it plainly, without emotion. "They want us beyond the notch." "Then we go," Mr. Hale said. He did not look backward. He did not permit us to observe his trembling hands. He pushed through the notch and onto the narrow shelf beyond. We followed in single file, with no room whatsoever to turn about. The shelf ran along a drop that descended far enough to guarantee death. At the far end, the ledge turned sharply into a stand of laurel and thicker vegetation. I fixed my eyes upon that point and placed each foot precisely where Elijah placed his. Halfway across, a low rumble commenced somewhere below us. It was not thunder. It was a deep, rolling sound like massive stones shifting position. A small landslide spilled down and across the slope beneath the shelf. Dust rose and hung, suspended in the air. I tasted grit upon my tongue. The sound ceased as abruptly as it had begun. I took one slow, careful breath and placed my boot again. When we reached the far end, Elijah stepped into the laurel and raised his hand in the stop signal. I squeezed in behind him. Through the leaves, I perceived an opening in the brush, a bowl-shaped hollow beyond, and a cluster of shapes moving within it. Tall, dark, and eerily quiet. More than two. I counted 3 on the near side, and additional shapes beyond that I could not enumerate accurately. They had not been driving us away. They had been driving us toward this precise location. We retreated into the laurel slowly. No one uttered a sound. Samuel held the mules motionless by their lead ropes. But even the animals seemed to comprehend that this was not ordinary danger. Their chests rose rapidly, and their ears twitched without rhythm. I felt sweat cold upon my back despite the heavy air. The shapes in the hollow moved with steady purpose, sorting through fallen limbs and stones in a pattern I could not decipher. It did not appear random. It resembled an activity with established procedure. The smaller shapes remained closer to the larger ones. They carried short branches and placed them in small piles, as if categorizing them. One of the larger creatures leant down and cracked open a rotted log with its bare hands. It extracted something and passed it to the smaller one beside it. "We cannot cross through that," Mr. Hale whispered. "They don't intend for us to leave," Brody whispered in return. His voice trembled violently. "We remain here until they relocate," Elijah said. "If we attempt to return, that path is gone. We cannot ascend the way we descended. We wait for an opportunity." "Opportunity," Jonah said under his breath. "That resembles a family unit." "Families feed," Elijah said quietly. "Families defend." That single word made me think of the bones we had observed earlier at the draw. I felt nausea rise in my throat. Mr. Hale closed his eyes for a moment. I observed him repeating the problem to himself in silence, weighing impossible options. Our survey line cut through wilderness. Our retreat was blocked. Our only path was forward, but forward meant entering a place we manifestly should not enter. "We proceed around the bowl," he said finally. "Wide arc, no sound whatsoever, no fire today." We cut north and regained the ridge line further ahead. "They'll hear the mules," Elijah said. "Their footsteps carry considerable distance." "We cover their hooves with sackcloth," Hale answered. We moved slowly and deliberately. No one argued. It was a plan that felt desperate, but not entirely suicidal. Samuel tore strips of canvas from an old grain sack and secured them around the mule's hooves. The animals objected initially, but they tolerated it after a moment of stamping. The sound diminished by half, not silent, but significantly softer. We departed the ledge and entered thicker timber on the northern slope. The brush clung to our legs. Branches scratched at our sleeves and faces. Every step felt louder than it should have. I counted my breaths between each footfall. Samuel led the animals in the middle of our column, so the rest of us formed a protective perimeter. We advanced along the incline in a shallow diagonal. After 20 minutes, Elijah raised his hand for stillness. We froze immediately. From the hollow behind us came a single call, short, hard, followed by two lower calls spaced widely apart. The working shapes had noticed something amiss. I looked back through a gap between trunks and observed the tallest shape stand fully erect. Its head turned toward the ridge line we had abandoned. It stared up the slope with unmistakable intelligence. It did not look our direction. Not yet. We accelerated our pace, but maintained the same careful steps. I forced my gaze ahead. The forest became a monotonous world of trunks and shadow, so uniform that direction felt uncertain. Only Elijah's calm, forward movement kept me anchored to any meaning for forward. I ceased thinking about schedules or maps. I did not think about the third ridge or the plateau. I thought only of escaping this bowl alive. Near midday, we reached a line of boulders encrusted with pale moss. Elijah signaled that we should rest in the shadow of one of them. The animals drank from our canteens quietly. Jonah cut small strips of salted pork and distributed them without commentary. We ate in profound silence. Each bite was taken slowly, so the sound would not carry through the still air. "We need to ascend higher," Elijah said. "The plateau on this side is closer to the north rim than Hale marked on the company maps. The cartography is overly optimistic." Hale said nothing to defend the maps. He sat with his back pressed against the stone and stared at the ground with hollow eyes. He appeared older in that moment, not defeated precisely, but stripped of his professional veneer. "We keep north and climb near the choke point between the twin spurs," he said. His voice steadied again with visible effort. "We must reach open ground before dusk. If we're trapped in cover when night falls, we won't be able to hold them off." Brody nodded rapidly. He desperately wanted orders. Any orders at all. We commenced our ascent again. The terrain grew increasingly challenging. Roots tangled thicker, and the slope forced us to lean forward at uncomfortable angles. Sweat soaked through my shirt again, but the air felt cooler now. The higher we climbed, the more pronounced the wind became. A favorable sign. Open ground always held more wind. We had covered approximately another half-mile when the first scream tore through the woods. It was not human in origin. It was not the blunt call from the previous night. This was sharp, elongated, full of breath. It carried either pain or rage, difficult to determine which. We stopped dead in our tracks. Then another answered from close behind us on the lower slope. This one sounded closer than any call yet. Considerably closer. "They found our trail," Elijah said simply. Samuel drew his knife and maintained his other hand upon the mule rope. His jaw tightened visibly. Jonah's lips moved in silent prayer. Brody clutched his rifle close to his chest with both hands, as though he wished to hide behind it. "We keep moving," Hale said. "No panic. Maintain formation." We pushed upward with renewed urgency. The calls began alternating rapidly, high then low, two different directions. They were coordinating their pursuit. They knew precisely where we were. They were closing in. The brush thickened again and slowed our progress. Branches snagged on equipment. Laurel scraped our sleeves and faces. The forest felt like a maze contracting around us. I heard a branch snap behind us. Not a small twig, but something substantial and thick. Samuel turned sharply with the lead rope, and the mules balked, refusing to advance. Hale hissed for movement, but the animals would not respond. Then, just behind the line of trees below our position, a large shape moved through the brush. It was not fully visible, but its height was unmistakable. It stood at least 6.5 feet tall, possibly taller. Broad shoulders, thick arms, covered in dark hair that appeared almost black in the shadows. It moved with confidence and purpose. It did not rush. It stalked. "Go," Elijah said urgently. "Now!" The animals surged forward in panic and nearly tore the rope from Samuel's grip. We pressed through the brush toward a patch of large stones that promised elevation. The calls behind us quickened in tempo and urgency. Another branch broke. Something moved parallel to us, higher up the slope. Not one creature. Two. They were flanking our position. "We need elevation," Hale said, his voice strained. "We need open rock where we can see them coming." We reached the stones. They formed a natural staircase of sorts. We scrambled up them as rapidly as the mules could navigate. One animal slipped and scraped its flank against the rock, but continued moving. My lungs burned with exertion. The forest behind us grew louder with heavy footfalls and those terrible calls. As we crested the stones, the trees thinned dramatically. Wind struck my face, real wind, fresh and free. The sky opened overhead in a vast expanse. For a brief, glorious moment, I felt hope surge within my chest. Then we perceived what lay ahead on the plateau. 3 tall shapes stood near the center of the open ground, upright and watching. One was far larger than the others, taller than any figure we had encountered thus far, with shoulders like carved stone and a chest broad enough to hold the weight of many years. It resembled the patriarch of the ridge. They had anticipated our route. They had driven us with surgical precision. Hale stopped dead. Elijah brought his rifle up slowly, but did not aim it directly. We all froze in place, trapped between 2 forces, the pursuers behind us and the sentinels ahead. In that suspended moment, the wind carried the scent of earth and musk and something that felt ancient in a manner that history books cannot record. The elder shape stepped forward one slow step, its eyes fixed upon Elijah first, then Hale, then myself. We were no longer explorers. We were no longer surveyors charting timber resources. We were trespassers standing in a place where our kind possessed no claim whatsoever. And they knew we had no path remaining but through them. The elder shape raised one arm, not rapidly, not aggressively, just a steady elevation of its limb, as if establishing hierarchy amongst the others. The 2 shapes beside it lowered their heads slightly in unmistakable deference. Their posture transformed. They were not preparing to charge. They were blocking our passage. No one spoke. I heard nothing except the wind and my own labored breathing. I looked at Elijah. His face was calm, but extraordinarily pale. He lowered his rifle a fraction so the barrel pointed at the ground rather than forward. The elder observed that motion with clear comprehension. I cannot adequately explain how I knew this, but the creature understood gestures and their meanings. This realization provided just enough room for rational thought to penetrate our fear. Hale slowly reached into his coat pocket and extracted his folded map. He held it openly in both hands so the shapes could observe that he was not retrieving a weapon. He unfolded it once and maintained it at chest height, as though offering the intention behind the ink, that we had come to observe and measure, not to take or destroy. He spoke quietly but clearly. "We will leave. We will not mark this land for timber. We will never return." The elder lowered its arm gradually. Behind us, I detected movement again on the slope. 2 additional shapes appeared between the trees. We were now surrounded on both sides. There was no stratagem remaining, no clever route to safety. They had drawn the circle around us with complete precision. "Elijah," Hale whispered, his voice breaking slightly. "Tell me what to do." Elijah stared at the elder for an extended period. His jaw worked as he swallowed with difficulty. Then he turned his head slightly so we could hear him, but he did not break eye contact with the creature. "Everyone kneel," he said. "Place your rifles upon the ground in front of you. Palms open, eyes downward." Brody's breath caught audibly. What if kneeling signals submission? What if that's precisely what they desire? Elijah answered without looking away from the elder. "Then submission allows us to survive. Standing here results in us being torn apart." Hale nodded once. He knelt. I knelt immediately after. Jonah and Samuel followed his example. Brody hesitated for the briefest moment, then dropped to his knees as well. Elijah descended last, moving with deliberate control. We placed our rifles upon the ground. I held my palms open before me, clearly visible. The wind cut across the plateau again, cold and sharp. The elder stepped closer by 2 measured paces. It towered above us now, near enough that I could observe the thickness of its forearms, the dark hair with gray streaks running through portions of it. The shape possessed a presence that felt far older than human age could measure. The elder leant down slightly, as if inspecting us with genuine curiosity. Then behind its massive left arm, something small moved, a juvenile. The smaller shape we had glimpsed earlier emerged from behind its guardian. It reached its hand toward Elijah's boot with childlike curiosity. It produced a soft, chuffing noise, inquisitive, not hostile. Elijah did not move a single muscle. The elder shifted its considerable weight and blocked the young one gently, but firmly with its arm, protecting the juvenile from potential danger. Then it turned its head toward the north ridge, away from the direction we had traveled, and emitted one short, sharp call. It was not loud. It was an instruction, a command. The shapes behind us on the slope reacted first. They turned away. They withdrew. There was no rustle of panic, no hurried retreat. They simply melted into shadow, disappearing one by one with remarkable silence. The 2 shapes flanking the elder stepped backward. They rotated their bodies slowly toward the same direction the elder had indicated. They were creating a corridor, an escape route. It was simultaneously a warning and an act of mercy. Elijah lifted his chin once, subtle, controlled, acknowledging the gift we had been granted. Then he rose to his feet with excruciating slowness. We followed his lead carefully. We did not retrieve our rifles immediately. We did not look directly into the elder's eyes. We simply backed away several steps and turned toward the northern rim where the wind blew strongest. We walked past them. I remember the sound of my boots upon stone with perfect clarity. I remember the trembling beneath my ribs. I remember the precise moment when the elder ceased watching us and turned back toward the hollow we had been forcibly driven from. The young one followed close behind its guardian, glancing once in my direction before it vanished into the brush. When we reached the far edge of the plateau, the ground fell away into a steep descent. We did not speak until the timber had swallowed us again and the shapes had disappeared entirely from view. Hale leant heavily against a tree trunk and exhaled a breath he seemed to have been holding for hours. "We proceed due north," he said, his voice shaking now that the immediate threat had passed. "No camp tonight unless the terrain absolutely forces us to stop. We maintain distance. We keep moving until we locate water and a navigable path eastward. I want to reach a river by tomorrow evening." None of us challenged that directive. We descended the far side of the plateau as rapidly as caution permitted. The air grew markedly colder and the wind carried in from the east. The terrain shifted into rockier soil with patches of thorns and more sparse timber. I checked my pocket watch instinctively, though the sun's angle provided sufficient information. The afternoon was still relatively young. We possessed hours of daylight remaining. As we moved, I found myself unable to shake one thought that circled repeatedly in my mind. Those creatures were not mindless, reckless beasts. They possessed social order. They had young to protect. They demonstrated restraint when they could have slaughtered us beneath the ridge without any effort whatsoever. They had controlled the entire encounter from its inception. We had crossed beyond their claimed territory because they had permitted it, not because we had outmaneuvered them. The subsequent hours passed in oppressive silence. Every snapping twig made us freeze in place. Every gust of wind that carried an unfamiliar scent made us clutch at our rifles without fully raising them. Elijah assumed point again. His pace had transformed. He was no longer marking a survey route for timber assessment. He was marking an exit, and nothing else mattered. As dusk approached, we discovered the faint trace of a game trail pointing toward lower elevations. The wind here carried the unmistakable smell of river water, faint but distinctly present. Elijah stopped and listened intently. No calls, no stones striking trees, no heavy pacing footfalls behind us. The forest here felt different. Not safe precisely, but clear of that oppressive pressure that had weighed upon the ridges behind us. Hale finally spoke. "We survived the plateau," he said quietly. "Tomorrow morning, we follow the river eastward. Then we return to Knoxville. And then we never speak a single word of what we witnessed to the company." Brody gave a strained, bitter laugh. "You believe they'd credit our account anyway?" "No," Hale said. "But if any of us attempts to document this terrain again, they'll dispatch additional men. Then more after that, and eventually someone won't escape alive. Better to let these ridges remain unmapped." We established camp near Fallen Pine. We constructed a tiny fire, barely more than coals, and spoke no words beyond absolute necessities. My hand still trembled when I wrote the bare minimum coordinates and route directions in my notebook. Every scratch of graphite upon paper felt thunderously loud. Before I lay down to attempt sleep, I asked Elijah one question that had been plaguing me. "Why did they spare us?" He stared at the thin line of flame and answered without looking at me. "Because we provided them room to choose mercy." His voice held no comfort whatsoever. The truth was, beneath that vast sky, surrounded by those dark slopes and the distant roar of mountain wind, the realization sank deep that we had only survived because the Elder had decided our presence was not yet a threat worth eliminating. That night, sleep came in brief, shallow bursts. Each time I woke, I expected to hear them again. The calls, the footsteps, the heavy breathing just beyond the firelight. But there was nothing except the sound of wind and the faint movement of water somewhere below our position. We departed at first light the following morning. We did not look backward. The ground sloped steadily downward for most of that morning, and with each 100 steps we took, the air felt incrementally less oppressive and the silence less threatening. Still, nobody spoke unless words were absolutely necessary. Our minds were focused entirely upon reaching civilization. Our bodies moved as though we were still being hunted, because the fear had penetrated deep and established permanent residence. Around midday, we reached the river. It was not particularly large, but it cut through a shallow ravine with clear, moving water that sang over smooth stones. Elijah knelt at the edge and tested the current with his hand, watching how the water moved around his fingers. "This will take us eastward," he said. "Keep it on our right." We follow the bank until the valley opens and we find flatter terrain. We followed the riverbank with renewed energy, careful to avoid deep mud that might slow our progress. The trees thinned progressively and the world felt wider again, less claustrophobic. The further we walked, the more I realized that none of us had fully processed what had occurred. We were alive. That was indisputable. But something about walking away from that territory made me feel as though the mountains themselves still observed from behind, watching to ensure we truly departed. We camped early that evening because the riverbank widened into flat ground, and we desperately wanted daylight to establish our position. The river drowned out distant sounds, and the air smelled cleaner here, less laden with that musky scent that had permeated the higher ridges. Still, we constructed a very small fire, barely sufficient to warm our hands. No one wished to draw attention to ourselves, even this far from the plateau. That night, Hale gathered us near the meager fire. "We say nothing about them," he stated firmly. "Not to the company, not to our families, not to anyone." His eyes looked lighter in the fire's glow, but his voice was colder than I had ever heard it. No good comes from men returning to a place not meant for us. No one disagreed with his directive. But then Jonah asked something I think we were all contemplating. "Why do you suppose there's none of their kind near towns? Why remain so deep in ridge country?" Elijah answered, and the heaviness in his voice made my chest constrict. "Because they know precisely what we would do if we found them in numbers where timber buyers could reach them. They've been watching us far longer than we've been watching them. They understand what we are." That line carved itself into my memory with indelible permanence. It made the world feel inverted, as though everything we had assumed about wilderness and civilization was fundamentally naive. We remained quiet after that exchange and attempted to sleep early. I woke some time after midnight because of a soft splash in the river. I sat up slowly and reached for my rifle. The moon hung low but bright enough that I could observe the water glinting silver. At first, I assumed it was an animal drinking at the far bank, but then I perceived a shape rise slightly above the river's surface, tall and unmistakably bipedal, and then retreat back toward the tree-line opposite our camp. I waited to hear additional noise, a call, a branch snapping. Nothing followed. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then a second splash occurred upstream. Another shape, perhaps. Could have been deer. Could have been anything. My stomach churned at the notion that perhaps we had not escaped their surveillance at all. Perhaps we had merely stepped into another section of their territory, and they were ensuring we continued in the correct direction. I lay back down and barely achieved sleep again. Morning arrived with merciful swiftness, and the river guided us another long stretch eastward. Trees thinned progressively. We began observing signs of older clearings from settlers decades past. Rotting fence posts half fallen and consumed by moss. The ghost of an old wagon trail nearly reclaimed by forest. Then, mid-afternoon, Samuel pointed toward thin smoke visible through the trees ahead. Elijah's shoulders eased visibly as soon as he observed it. The unmistakable sign of human habitation. A few hours later, we reached a small trading post positioned at a river bend. A man wearing a bowler hat and suspenders watched us dragging into the clearing. His face transformed when he observed our condition. Clothes torn from laurel, filth covering every part of us, profound exhaustion etched into all our expressions. "Where do you gentlemen come out of?" he asked cautiously. Hill did not provide details. "We came off the high ridges. Timber company sent us. We're heading back to Knoxville. Need shelter and supplies." The trader's face shifted subtly when his eyes assessed our gear and demeanor. "You came from the North Hollers?" he asked slowly, with evident concern. "Near enough," Elijah answered tersely. The man nodded. He did not ask further questions. He pointed to a structure beside the trading post. "Beds in there. You can settle accounts tomorrow." That night, all of us slept on actual cots for the first time in days. Solid timber walls surrounded us, a proper roof above us. No shifting shadows between tree trunks. But even with that comfort, I woke more than once because my body anticipated movement in the darkness. For months afterward, I would wake the same way, reaching for a rifle that was not there. The following morning, the trader served us breakfast. He asked again which hollow we had traversed, and Elijah only said, "North of the third ridge." The trader's expression conveyed that he understood quite enough. "You're fortunate," he said carefully. "Most folks don't come from that run without trouble of some kind." Hale shot him a sharp look. "What manner of trouble?" The trader shrugged and pretended to focus on his skillet. "Folks disappear sometimes. Hunters, trappers, surveyors, always up that way. Some say there's something up there that doesn't care for mankind. Nobody really knows for certain." Nobody at our table responded. We consumed our meal in silence. We paid the man and followed the river road until we intersected with a proper wagon route. 3 days later, we reached Knoxville. The company barely cared about what had transpired. Hale told them the terrain was too unstable and geologically unsound, not worth development costs. He submitted a half-complete map showing fractured ridges, poor soil composition, and inadequate timber density. They attributed it to poor resource potential and closed the file. The company never dispatched another crew in that direction, as far as we ever learned. We all separated gradually over the subsequent weeks and months. Jonah departed Knoxville entirely, taking work in the lowlands. Samuel found employment on farms closer to his family's homestead. Brody began working in the stockyards and refused to travel outside settled counties ever again. Hale returned to survey work, but never again in mountain country. When I encountered him months later, he appeared recovered on the surface, but his hand still trembled ever so slightly when he thought no one was observing. Elijah disappeared back into the ridges he knew, but never those ridges. He would never venture near that section of the Appalachian Mountains again. I heard years later that he had taken to guiding expeditions in the Smokies, but he was selective about which terrain he would enter, and he turned down lucrative contracts without explanation. As for myself, I continued working as a surveyor's assistant for several more years, but I never again volunteered for wilderness assignments. I took positions near towns, near roads, near civilization. I told no one what we had witnessed, not my wife when I eventually married, not my children when they arrived, not my colleagues or friends. I only tell this story now because I am elderly and the days ahead of me are demonstrably fewer than those behind. I remained silent initially because I knew no one would believe our account. But I also maintained silence because I never wanted men with avarice in their hearts to decide those creatures needed to be studied or hunted or caged for exhibition. Some places are not ours to measure or claim. Some beings understand that we do not belong in their territory and choose whether we return alive or not at all. I still remember that elder upon the plateau with perfect clarity, the manner in which it chose restraint instead of violence, the way it kept its young, one shielded from us, protecting it from potential harm. It permitted us to leave. It created a corridor for our escape. We only survived because they chose mercy over retribution. In the decades since that expedition, I have read occasional reports of surveyors, hunters, and trappers who disappeared in those mountains. Sometimes bodies were recovered, though rarely intact. More often, they simply vanished, leaving behind abandoned camps and scattered equipment. The authorities always attributed these disappearances to bears, accidents, or disorientation. I know better. Those ridges belong to them, just as they always have. They were there before we arrived with our maps and our ambitions, and they will remain long after we are gone. They have learned to avoid us, to remain in the deepest hollers and the highest ridges where timber companies find it unprofitable to operate. But sometimes we venture too far. We push too deep. We fail to recognize the warnings, the stacked stones, the stripped bark, the footprints that are too large and too flat to be anything we have named. And when that happens, they must decide what to do with us. I was fortunate. We were fortunate. The elder on that plateau was old enough to remember a time before we arrived in these mountains in great numbers. Old enough to understand that killing us would bring more of us, that violence begets violence. It chose a different path. It let us go. But I have wondered, in the quiet hours of these final years, whether future encounters will end as mercifully. Whether younger members of their kind, who have only known encroachment and loss, will show the same restraint. Whether the old ways, the old understandings between their kind and ours, will hold as the mountains grow smaller and our appetites grow larger. I do not know the answer. I only know that some boundaries should never be crossed, some territories never claimed. The mountains keep their secrets, and perhaps that is how it should remain. Let this account serve as warning to any who would follow where we once walked. The third ridge is not empty. The high hollers are not uninhabited. And the tall ones who dwell there are not legends or superstitions. They are real. They are watching, and they remember those who trespass. May God have mercy on anyone who forgets.